Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Over the last few months on this channel we have looked at a number of arcade style beat 'em up games published by Capcom. This has included the entirety of the Final Fight trilogy and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Today we are going to look at the history of another game of this style published by that video game juggernaut. The game and its ports in question today all star Captain Commando, a character who at one point in time was even considered to be Capcom's mascot. Captain Commando is an interesting character with an interesting backstory, with perhaps an even more interesting arcade game in which he features in. So, keeping all of this in mind, let's dig right in and look at the games and history behind them. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Captain Commando, an arcade classic starring Capcom's overlooked mascot. Yeah! Today's story starts out way back in 1986, 5 years before the release of Captain Commando in the arcades. But despite the lack of a video game, this would be the first time consumers would come into contact with the character. Unlike many company mascots, such as Sonic and Mario for example, Captain Commando at first would not have a game to call his own. Instead, the character would appear on multiple North American boxes of NES titles throughout the mid-80s. Basically, early Capcom releases for the popular system would be marketed as the Captain Commando Challenge series, and would feature illustrations of the gentleman on the back of the packaging. These early depictions of the character depicted him as a futuristic looking space hero wielding a ray gun in one hand and two large medallions around his neck with the letter C engraved on them. He would not exclusively just appear on the box art either. He would often appear in instruction manuals too, delivering special messages to Capcom consumers, sometimes simply congratulating players on making their procurements. Moving from 1986 through to 1989, the character would once again surface on Capcom NES game artwork, this time with an all-new depiction wearing a pilot suit in front of a fighter jet, holding a helmet under his right arm with an alien chimp sitting on his right shoulder and the Capcom logo in an airbrush style above them. As you can see, this version of the character is beginning to look more like the one we would get in an eventual game. The character, who had featured on the boxes of many games and acted as a cartoon-drawn spokesman for Capcom, would finally get a game to call his own in 1991 with the arcade release of Captain Commando, 5 years after his original box art appearances. The arcade flyer for Mr. Capcom's game states that no one knows fighting games like Capcom. While others design games around existing heroes, Capcom designs original blockbuster titles like Final Fight and Street Fighter II. Captain Commando is no exception. Total player control allows both experts and novices to experience the gameplay that has made Capcom famous. Whilst it is a fairly known factoid that Captain Commando was at one point positioned as a mascot for the company, particularly when you take into account people found a new interest in the character after his appearance in the Capcom Vs series, a fact that I doubt is as well known is the fact that in all technicalities, Captain Commando is part of the Final Fight series. Apart from the Final Fight trilogy and Captain Commando both being developed by Capcom, and the fact that the games have strikingly similar gameplay design, there is even more to this story than that. Captain Commando is part of the Final Fight series due to the fact that the game is literally set in Metro City, the same location as the Final Fight series. Something tragic, which we learn from the game's story, that is, although Captain Commando is set in the distant future after the Final Fight trilogy, is that Metro City is still an absolute hive for scum and villainy. All in all, suggesting that Mike Hagar was a complete failure in his job role, as he managed to change nothing about the place during his term. Speaking of the Final Fight canon, as you know, the Final Fight series is set in the same universe as Street Fighter, which is further backed up and proven by the large amount of times characters from Final Fight appear in Street Fighter, and when characters from Street Fighter appear in Final Fight. Thus meaning Street Fighter games, Final Fight games and Captain Commando all feature in exactly the same story canon, which is interesting to say the very least. The game that takes place in Metro City takes place in the futuristic year of 2026, a year that was set 35 years after the game's release, but only 6 years from now. So let's see in this video how good Capcom were at predicting what this time frame in history would actually be like. Like Mike Hagar before him, Captain Commando too sets out to save Metro City, accompanied by a group of friends and allies known as Commando Companions. This force for apparent good have risen up to protect not just planet Earth, but the entire galaxy from gangs of superpowered criminals. Instantly as usual, making the developers at Capcom look rather stupid if they believed that humanity could progress this quickly in just 35 years. Fantasy or not, it still baffles me that space-themed stories are usually set in the close future as opposed to thousands of years' time. Why do writers pull this trope so frequently? I can't get my head around it. It's ridiculous. Now, in terms of the gameplay that can be experienced within Captain Commando, as stated earlier, it is similar to Final Fight and the other beat-em-ups of the era. A feature that makes Captain Commando special though is that, unlike Final Fight that came before it, Captain Commando cabinets allow gameplay to take place between 4 players simultaneously, offering gamers the choice between 4 interesting characters. The game's 4 players all handle slightly differently, adding to some gameplay variety and a choice for players. Captain Commando, the leader of the Commando team, has both a powerful mind and body. He can perform a variety of energy releasing attacks via the use of his energy gloves. We also have Mac the Knife, who as you can see resembles an Egyptian mummy. Ridiculously, he is a mummy-like alien from outer space, and uses subsonic knives that can melt away enemies, perform spinning attacks, and lash opponents with his bloody bandages. Further to this, we have Ginzu the Ninja as a playable character, a highly trained killer who uses a ninjutsu fighting style, which he supposedly inherited from his master Guy of Final Fight fame. He uses his smoke bombs, creates smoke screens around his body, and cuts enemies from above using flying katanas. Probably the most quirky of the whole lineup is a fighter known as Babyhead. This character is a super genius infant who fights using a robot that he actually designed himself. The robot is strong and quick and can launch rockets from his knees. He can also perform rolling punches that spin like a drill, crushing enemies. In terms of Captain Commando's controls themselves, the configuration is literally identical to that of Final Fight, combined in an 8-way joystick along with 2 action buttons. Primarily, these controls are used for moving, attacking and jumping, but combinations of inputs allow for more varied attacks, such as grabbing and performing special moves that drain a portion of the user's health, once again identical to Final Fight before it. Like the later Final Fight games on the Super Nintendo, players can dash and attack, and perform jumping, dashing attacks. We also have other Final Fight and beat 'em up tropes included in the gameplay, such as picking up health restorative items hidden in breakable containers. Wieldable weapons also make a return in this game. Differing from Final Fight though is that these weapons can actually be held onto and carried from stage to stage. On top of everything else, players also gain the opportunity to ride certain robots throughout the game, which feature their own life bars, allowing players to sustain additional damage. The robots come in 3 varieties, some that can punch, some that have flamethrowers, and others that can freeze enemies. Now let's go through perhaps one of my favourite elements of beat-em-ups in general, the level design and stage aesthetics. Captain Commando is set in Metro City in the year 2026, so let's see what it presents players with. We are straight away thrown onto a dystopian street featuring a range of damaged buildings and chaos, much like Final Fight's theme. The future depiction is instantly hilarious though, as the first thing we see is a shop with broken windows that sells 3D televisions, which are for some reason all CRT monitors. Space travel and CRTs, eh? A better future than we actually got. Some of the initial enemies look ridiculous, not really sure what they are meant to be wearing. Hazmat suits maybe? Did the developers think something crazy would happen, like a global pandemic in the 2020s? Sounds a little far-fetched to me. Other enemies look pretty accurate. You get plenty of fashion criminals today who wear ripped skinny jeans, like the enemies found in this stage. The stage is extremely short, and players can pick up fighting robots early on. The boss of the area looks like something out of Mad Max, so I guess fairly accurate I suppose from what it looks like 2020 is shaping up to be like. Stage 2 takes place straight inside a museum. Dinosaur bones are on display in the background as dominatrixes ignore social distancing rules by trying to electrocute the players' balls. The next section of the stage sees players descend into a cave-looking area where the player takes on fatty boom booms and recurring enemies that look like Dr. Death from the Brawl for All tournament. The boss of the stage looks rather strange but wields interesting looking harpoon-like weapons. Once he is defeated, players move on to a stage known as Ninja House. The opening part of this stage really reminds me of an area I played through recently in Turtles the Hyperstone Heist, but as I have said before on this channel, beat 'em ups often borrow from one another. This area has some new enemy sprites, for example these women who look like Amazonians. As players near the gate, they start encountering ninja and samurai like enemies, and once inside many of these enemies begin popping out of revolving doors. The boss fight of the area takes place against a large opponent known as Yamato, as a band play in the background and a crowd watch and cheer the player on. Stage 4 takes place at a circus, which isn't exactly a theme many would associate with the future. Once inside though, players take on hordes of enemies, while some even ride robots. This scene looks very cool as it features a range of enemies jeering in the crowd, which is audibly represented too. Weirdly, after dealing with this on the same stage, players enter a lab, where a boss monster fight takes place as a mad scientist cowers in the background. Stage 5 appears to take place whilst the players ride jet-powered surfboards, a stage design choice ripped straight from the 1989 Turtles arcade game by Konami. After dealing with opponents on the open waters, players soon enter a sewer, which is no surprise really, as Turtles was the hottest franchise on the planet at the time. Through all of this, there is a time limit where players must defeat the scientist who escaped from the previous stage. Stage 6 is certainly very interesting and a far cry from the future we really received. This stage sees players fighting their way through a tunnel under the sea, with cities in glass domes looming in the background. It all looks a bit Bioshock, to be honest with you. No new enemies here though, just hordes of which we've seen previously. The next part of the stage sees players arrive in a lab area with some strange design choices, including the depiction of an orca strapped to a bench. Kind of reminded me for a brief moment of the South Park episode where they send a killer whale to the moon. The boss of this stage is lazily just 2 palette swaps of the boss that we encountered in the second stage, so pure laziness from the developers here. Stage 7 starts out rather psychedelically with trippy red flickering lights illuminating the red machinery below the glass the players are walking on. There are also falling barrels in this area reminiscent of Donkey Kong. Players begin to diagonally scroll, progressing through the stage, with enemies entering the fold via doors that open in the background. This is a longer stage than some of those seen previously, with the players eventually reaching a large muscular opponent known as Blood aboard the top of a moving vehicle. He serves as the boss of this area. Stage 8 takes place in space, as what would a game set in the 2020s be without some stages taking place within the final frontier. As always, as we get nearer to the end of the game, the amount of enemies on screen and the difficulty begins to ramp up a bit. The later part of the stage also features another classic beat-em-up trope, a bloody lift area. Even in the game set in the future, Capcom felt the need to include a lot of these classic themes. The boss of the area is a fight against these strange fat men who can transform into doppelgangers of the player, which is a fun boss fight nearing the end of the title. The final stage features combat taking place on a different planet known as Callisto. Despite the planet being different to Earth, sadly all of the enemy sprites are just those we have seen previously. But level design gets interesting as players appear to enter a high-class bar, featuring strange alien men in the background, for some reason with human women. Not really sure why aliens from a different species though would be into human women. Bit weird really. The final boss fight takes place against Scumocide in the most challenging encounter in the game. I must say I really like this room, particularly the organ in the background. The end sequence of the game sees people cheering on Captain Commando's victory on 3D CRT televisions through the store's windows we saw at the beginning of the game. The final scene sees the city mayor announcing that the super criminals have been defeated. Whilst we do not get a close-up shot of the mayor, it is notable that he is wide set and has a moustache, making me wonder if Mike Hagar became the mayor of Metro City once again in his later life. The ending of this game suggests that this is perhaps the case. Overall, when it comes to this arcade game, I personally feel that in level design terms it perhaps stands out a lot more from many other beat-em-ups, and the futuristic setting sets it apart from many others. Most of the levels in the game look quite unique for a beat-em-up, but the inspiration in some of the stages taken from 1989's Turtles arcade game is pretty obvious to see, particularly the sewer section of the game. In some ways the game is more unique than any Final Fight game, and arguably better than any of them too, simply down to the fact that the game offers 4 player support simultaneously. The game has some flaws though. For example, the stages are mostly very short, and as a result a playthrough of this game only takes around 30 minutes, making it a smaller title than many of the others we have looked at on here. But I guess size isn't everything. After all, you should probably know, Captain Commando is basically Final Fight with a twist, and a damn fine twist it is. This delightful little title would not remain unique to the arcades either, and ports would eventually make it home to players. Bizarrely, a Super Nintendo port would not arrive on the platform until 1995, 4 years after the arcade release, when the system was in its twilight years, and even more strangely, years after the conclusion of the Final Fight trilogy. Rather than porting the game over, Capcom were making completely exclusive games for the Nintendo platform, and never bothered with this one until much later. It is not bad to be fair, but suffers from all the downgrade you would expect with a CPS-1 port over to the SNES. The number of enemies that appear on the screen at one time has been cut down, rideable mechs have been completely removed, graphics have been scaled back, and 4-player support was reduced to 2. In fact, the game also featured the usual Nintendo of America censorship too, such as reduced gore and more clothing on the female characters. There was also supposed to be a Mega CD port, which would have been great to see considering the quality of Final Fight CD, but sadly it was cancelled, which I would probably put down to the Sega Mega CD's lack of success. Even more insanely, 7 years after the arcade release, Captain Commando would be ported to the original PlayStation. This Japanese exclusive version of the game would be close to arcade perfect due to the obvious power of a Sony PlayStation. The game even featured an arranged soundtrack. Sadly though, the game only offered 3-player support at a time, as opposed to 4 like in the actual arcade game. It is of note though that X-Men vs Street Fighter on the PlayStation dropped the tag team function in the game, due to the PlayStation having a poor working memory when it came to sprite-based gaming. So I would imagine that Captain Commando was cut from supporting 4 players down to 3 for the exact same reason. Past this point, the arcade game would appear on compilation discs for various platforms, and the Captain Commando character would live on within Capcom vs Fighters and other crossover games. Still though, the original Captain Commando arcade game featured the character's most important outing, and gave Capcom's 1980s spokesman and mascot his most prominent role to date. Captain Commando is a quirky take on the Final Fight formula, and a game all beat-em-up fans should make the effort to play through at least once. It's a game that's great fun to play, and at the very least a title that expands both on Final Fight and Street Fighter lore. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Captain Commando, Capcom's overlooked mascot. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comment section which title you would like to hear me cover next. Make sure you like this video, subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an upload. I am currently running a poll on Patreon for the backers to pick between 10 different beat-em-up games so that I can cover one next Sunday. If you would like to vote in this poll and receive access to a bunch of exclusive incentives, you can join the Top Hat Gaming Man Backers Club for as little as $1 a month. You even get content ad-free. With regards to these lovely people, huge thanks go out to my patrons who literally keep this show on the road. Massive shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, Joseph Razmik, SpongeMat BYT, Hago, Alethea Swanson, Angel Light 85, Asobi Quang DX, Azrael Warakai, Brian Barry, Cambo Rambo 82, Carlos Domingos, Computer Man, Daniel Daly, Doug Perkins, ECU Professor, Gary Pinkett, Gianni V Sandizi, Glenny Glenn, Hamid Musa, House of the Ted, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joaquin Varela, Jordan Durant, Heo Vinagre, Keith Ferguson, Lars Zondervan, Matthew Robinson, Michael Cullix, Nick Daniels, Philip Manth, Prince Knight, Princess Anna, Timothy W. Haskins II, TOG Driver since Spaces, Adam Castin, Adrian Hannington, Andis Rainsberg, Andrew Bazanski, Andrew Pearson, Antonio Rodriguez, Bernard NG, Barbara Kitty, Chris Fisk, Chris Margarine, Chris Cool, Craig Jenkins, Crazy Yarl, Dan Barlow Jr., David Bow, Francesco Lacriola, Gregory Smorowicz, Hans Christian, Ivan M, Jake Whitford, James McDonald, Jazzy Tay, Joel, John Bates, Casey Wright, Kings Knight, Langston Minner, Lobster Punch, Lewis Viant, Luke Kavanagh, Marvin Araliga, Master Jinx, Matthew Rindle, Mean Machine Dean, Michael Hall, Mike Bruno, Noob, Paul Elliott, Retroversion.com, Richard Stewart, Rich67, Ron Studd, Sarah Powell, Soraya H. Al-Sarayi, Stephen Lewis, Time Lord Soundwave, Tom Elliott, Valet Mink Renee, Wazzo Jugs, Zai, and all of my other fantastic patrons, including those listed below. Thank you so much for all of your support. Yeah. Cheerio.